Hello everyone, and welcome to this video where we look at a member of my classic computer collection. And as in line with recent videos, today's one is a remake. It's of the Apple II Plus, and I've got a couple of clothes I also want to show you. There's not much that's changed as far as the content's concerned. I have tweaked one or two bits and pieces, but the big difference, of course, is this one's on high definition. So let's check out the Apple II Plus. The Apple II, the computer that came before the Apple II Plus, was a member of that venerable trinity of consumer-friendly microcomputers released in 1977. Unlike machines that went before, these micros needed no assembly or electronic skills. They were presented in a stylish case, could be purchased over the counter, and once plugged in, were good to go. The Apple II was designed and manufactured by Apple Computer, a company started by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Nearly everyone watching this video will know of this organization because it is one of the very few early microcomputer companies which have survived to this day. Well, at least to 2014, when this video was made. The machine was largely, but not exclusively, designed by Wozniak, and it was a big step up from his first bare-board machine, the Apple I. This second iteration was a stylish design which simply looked cool. Like the other members of the 1977 Trinity, the Commodore PET and the TRS-80 Model 1, the Apple II was a general-purpose microcomputer for home, hobby, and potentially business use. Here is an advertisement from that period. I'm amused by the way the wife, in the kitchen at the sink of course, is gazing adoringly at her husband, who in turn is gazing lovingly at his computer. It's such a retro 1970s image. The Apple II was expensive, but it sold well. In 1979, the Apple II Plus was introduced. The main change was that Woz's Integer Basic was replaced with Microsoft's AppleSoft Basic, which supported floating point arithmetic. There were a few other tweaks also, allowing improved graphics and disk boot support in ROM. Most Apple II Plus machines sold with 48K of RAM fitted, rather than the 16K of the Apple II, but essentially the machine was not much different from its predecessor. It was still, essentially, an Apple II. Outside North America, the Apple II Plus was badged the Apple II Euro Plus. These machines were configured for the local voltage, either 220 or 240 volts, and the video output changed to PAL rather than NTSC. It's one of these machines that I have in my collection. The Apple II and the II Plus sold here locally in New Zealand, as can be seen by this 1982 advertisement. However, they were eye-wateringly expensive. Hence they were limited to well-heeled professionals with deep pockets and a hobbyist bent, some schools and small businesses. So here's my Euro Plus. It's in pretty good condition, although it wasn't always like that. It came to me after being stored for years in a hay barn and some serious restoration was needed. There you can see the sculptured full-stroke keyboard. As a whole, the computer does look very sleek. This swept-back design was both stylish and futuristic for the time. In my opinion, it still is, and I just like looking at it. In fact, I would be happy to put it in a display case in my living room. This side view shows the vents, useful for cooling. Around the back of the machine, things are also minimalistic. On the left is a composite video socket and a couple of sockets for a cassette recorder. Although using cassette tape as storage was an option, most Apple IIs I saw in the day had disk drives. Tape storage in the Apple II was primitive compared to the TRS-80 Model 1 and Commodore PET, so it wasn't used much. Also, disk drives were comparatively cheap, as I'll discuss later. The vertical holes you can see there in the back of the case are for interface cables from expansion cards. And finally on the right is a power socket with a simple on-off switch. Attached to this Euro Plus are a couple of full-height disk-to floppy disk drives. These are the authentic drives for the likes of a genuine Apple II or II Plus. They go nicely with the machine. Unfortunately, they're both labelled as Disk 1, and one day I hope to find a bezel that says Disk 2 and so replace one of them. Some people would have these drives side by side on top of the computer case, then they'd place the monitor on top of them, but I prefer them stacked at the side like this. Now, one interesting thing about the drives is they draw their power from the computer itself. This is a plus over other machines of the time whose drives had separate power supplies, hence you ended up with a lot of extra desk clutter with cables, etc. Covering the surface area. Now, getting into an Apple II is ridiculously easy. You just pop off the lid like so. It's practically inviting you to tinker with it. So here we can see the general layout. It's a single main board with a power supply on the left. You can see from this shot that the board continues to the front of the machine. All the chips are socketed. The ICs outlined in that white square are the RAM chips. Just above them are 6 ROM chips carrying Applesoft Basic and Bootstrap routines. That large, horizontally orientated chip is the heart of the machine, the 6502 microprocessor. 2 of the 8 expansion slots are occupied in this machine. One in the first slot, slot 0, contains 16K of extra RAM, which boosts the memory to 64K. This is often referred to as the language card, as this extra expansion was usually necessary to run languages other than BASIC, like Pascal for example. It is also necessary for running other operating systems like CP/M, as you'll see later in this video. Occupying slot 6 is the Disk 2 controller card. This card, and the Disk 2 system in general, is an example of the engineering genius of Steve Wozniak. It was a great design that worked, yet it required far fewer components than comparable systems. This made disk expansion for the Apple II far cheaper than on any other microcomputer of the time. The final feature is the expansion slots themselves. They made the system flexible and expandable. It was a hobbyist and hacker's dream. It also opened up the Apple II to third-party enterprise. Companies could make cards for the Apple II, increasing its usefulness for a specific purpose. This concept of expansion slots for auxiliary hardware hanging off a mainboard containing the basic circuitry was one IBM went for with their IBM PC. I thought I'd throw in a photo of the mainboard itself with a language card plugged in. Every socket is labelled with the IC that should be occupying it. I did get quite a few cards with this machine, and here are most of them. So as you can see, the machine's pretty well provided for. I'll talk about a few of these cards a little later. One card I'm glad I've got is this one. The EuroPlus as it stands cannot display colour. Woz used a lot of tricks to get colour on NTSC systems, tricks which didn't carry over to PAL. The addition of this PAL colour card means colour over composite video can be displayed. Here's the card on one of my clone motherboards. So time to boot up. The system auto boots if it detects a disk card in slot 6. The Apple II at the top is a sign-on text and then the operating system is loaded. This is Apple DOS 3.1, which is the standard DOS for the machine. The boot routine on this disk looks for the RAM expansion card, and if it finds that, it loads in the original integer basic into RAM just in case the user wants it. Woz's integer basic can be faster than Applesoft Basic for many things. So the flashing cursor means we've arrived, and I'm just typing in some text in Applesoft Basic. We can now write code or issue direct commands. So I've asked the machine to display what it is as a direct command. Catalog will show us what's on the disk. This is similar to the dir or directory command in many other systems. Okay, it's time now for some fun. I've got to load up one of my favourite games. It's called Taipan, and it's a trading game combining skill and luck. It's not just an Apple II game. In fact, it was written for many of the early micros. However, this version in its opening splash page does show some of the graphics capability of the Apple II. So it's as good as any game to show you. Note the fancy font along with the reverse flashing font. So the aim is to make as much money as possible and to retire rich and happy. To keep this video a reasonable size, I won't go
right through the game, but you can download it and play it on your Android device. Now that I've talked about the Apple EuroPlus, I want to show you a couple of the Apple clones I have. Apple clones out of Taiwan were very popular here in New Zealand in the early 1980s. We'll start with this curious beast. It's an RX 8800. I had this unit for a few years before I discovered who made it, and I chanced on this scanned advertisement in a website specialising in Apple II clones. And there it was on the upper right. It was made by Shin Sin Industrial Co. Limited from Taiwan. Many Apple II clones copied the same design as the Apple II case. Not this one though. Externally, this doesn't look like an Apple II at all. But this is not that unusual. Some Apple II Plus Taiwanese clones I've seen have the same cases as an IBM AT. As you can see, this unit is yellowed and sun damaged. I did treat it with Retrobrite a few years ago, but much of the yellowing is returned. It must have looked a smart unit when it was creamy white. And the keyboard with its function keys and numeric keypad suggests a serious business or scientific computer of the day. I like the white and grey colour scheme. Breaking into the unit is a matter of just sliding the top off, like so. Now I must tell you that the main board of this clone, and the other clone you'll see in a moment, is almost exactly the same as the Apple II Plus board. It's practically identical. No wonder Apple was pissed with this and took steps to shut these Taiwanese clones down. They are virtually 100% compatible with regards software. The only difference on boot up is that these clone ROMs show the text Ready Go at the top of the screen instead of the usual Apple II. Now you can see I've got quite a few cards in here. As this looked like a business machine, I decided to make it so. Cards you can see here are, in order from the bottom, first the Disk 2 card, next a Z80 card, or Z80 card for you guys in the USA. This was a common option for the Apple II Plus in a business setting, as it allowed the machines to run CP/M. Now why was this important? Because in the late 1970s, early 1980s, most dedicated business micros ran CP/M, and its programs like WordStar, DBase, etc. could be used. It was a kind of standard for business micros before the dominance of MS-DOS. An Apple II Plus with a Z80 card essentially gave you two computers in one. With the card, a business Z80 micro, and without the card, an Apple II Plus. The next card up is an 80-column card. This was also a popular option for an Apple II Plus in a business setting. It gave a lot more screen real estate. Although it wasn't necessary for CP/M on the machine, most CP/M software expected 80 columns. Finally, we have the 16K RAM expansion card, same one that was in my EuroPlus. CP/M expects to find 64K of RAM, so this card is compulsory. In a true business setting, there would have been a printer card among that lot too. I've got one, but I just haven't bothered to add it. No business computer was complete without a printer in the day. The 80-column card comes with its own video socket. I thought I'd show you this here, just so that you can see how it was wired up to the screen. And there you can see it connected with an RF cable to the monitor. I've got some clone drives for this machine also. These are not official Apple Disk 2 drives, but instead are later half-height drives modified to work with a Disk 2 card. Like a lot of the clone stuff, these drives are from Taiwan. Okay, so let's boot some CP/M. Just type directory. Now most of those files you can see there, any CP/M aficionado would recognize them. We'll just boot up good old Microsoft BASIC. Quite a few business applications were written in BASIC in the early days. Keyboard of this RX 8800 is a little soft, but it's not too bad. I could be happy typing on it for a while. This is a still shot of the machine with a different monitor. Incidentally, it wasn't necessary for an Apple II Plus or a II Plus clone to run CP/M to be useful as a business workstation. The first spreadsheet, VisiCalc, was written for the Apple II in its native DOS, and there were many word processing packages and database packages available which ran in DOS 3.1. Now here is my second Apple II Plus clone. This one's lost its label, but I think it's a Redstone, which was a popular Taiwanese brand down here. It's missing its Powerlight cover, but otherwise works just fine. Interestingly, the main board is exactly the same as the one in the RX 8800. And I mean exactly the same. It makes you wonder if some company wasn't simply making unbranded generic clone boards, then selling them to other manufacturers to add a case and their own branding. So that's it for the machines. Here you can see some of the books I have for the Apple II. Some of you old Apple II users might recognize some of these. It's just a fraction of the voluminous amount of literature that was written for the Apple II Plus. Here are some of the manuals I have. The first is the Apple II Reference Manual. It's packed to the rafters with detailed technical information. You've got circuit diagrams, you've got listings, you name it, and it's got it. One of the things that set the Apple II apart from its competitors in the day was the explicit details on how the computer worked that was published by Apple. This meant that anyone who wanted to produce an interface card or just tinker with the hardware had full details of what was going on under the hood. Apple encouraged users to experiment and play, unlike, say, Tandy with their TRS-80, who did just the opposite. Apple II users therefore felt that the Apple Computer Company supported and encouraged the enhancement of their machine, and this assisted with brand loyalty. So the next one up is a reference manual for AppleSoft Basic. All of these manuals are printed on high quality paper and they have a certain aesthetic to it. This publication quality would get even better when later Apple machines were released. But you can see here, just from flicking through the chapters, that it covers all of the basics of how you might want to use AppleSoft. It's a pretty useful manual. Here's another manual on BASIC, but rather than a reference manual, this is a tutorial. So this particular manual will teach you how to program in BASIC. You can see that it's themed in the same way, so it looks like it's related to that reference manual. That's full of good stuff. There are screenshots, there are example listings that you could type out to learn some concepts. Set out and illustrated quite well. Next up is this DOS manual, and this explains the disk operating system for the Apple II Plus. Quite comprehensive, and in fact doesn't only go into the disk operating system, but also diskettes and the concepts behind them. So you learn about sectors, you learn about diskette maintenance, how they work. So again, a pretty comprehensive manual, themed in the same way as the other ones that you've seen. So they will look like they belong to a family. Then we have this one. This is a manual on the Microsoft soft card. This is that Z80 card that I showed you in the clone machine. This was originally published as 2 manuals, and it largely explains the CP/M operating system. Now I believe this CP/M, this Z80 card, the soft card, was the only hardware product that Microsoft sold for 8-bit computers. And finally, I've got this handy reference file, reference card for the disk operating system. That's pretty handy. I've used that a number of times when playing around with my Apples. Now, I mentioned earlier that I got a lot of cards with my Apple II Plus. At the same time, I was also given a lot of software, and here's the bulk of it. Some of it's never been used, and the discs are in the original packets. So what are my final thoughts on the Apple II Plus? It was a very successful model, eventually being replaced by the Apple IIe in 1983. In fact, the Apple II, as a line of micros, was enduring, stretching from 1977 way up to 1993, when the last of the Apple IIe Platinums rolled off the production line. As mentioned before, it was the open architecture of the Apple II that won it many fans among the hobbyist and card-building community. It is with some irony, therefore, that Apple's next innovative line, the Macintosh, was largely a closed system. But in the Apple II and Macintosh, we can see the difference between the let's have fun hardware hacker Steve Wozniak and the task-orientated consumer appliance vision of Steve Jobs. In the end, Steve Jobs' vision has come to pass, and it is the logical end of mainstream computing. Most computers now are appliances. They're easy to use and just a tool for a task. Hardware shouldn't get in the way. In the hardware hacker community, though, the Apple II models still have a strong following, and given Apple Computer's legacy, they are increasingly collectible. Long may it be so. I'm glad I've got an Apple II Plus and a few clones for my stash.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that look at the Apple II Plus and a couple of clone machines. So until next time, keep well, and we'll see you in the next video.